In today's episode, the man we called Subsection 6. Technicians have to account for non-repair activity, all right then. It's a comedy show. Just watch it and laugh. You got it. So let's get started. The man we called Subsection 6. This happened long time ago, somewhere around 2012 to 2013. Had a good friend who I smoked cigars with, and he had a friend named Jim. I didn't see Jim very often cause we lived in different cities, but every time I visited we would smoke cigars in the park. Well, near the park. Jim was probably about the smartest guy that I've ever met, and if I met Einstein it might be eeny meeny miny mo. Well, almost. We called him Subsection 6 because he was always finding loopholes for absolutely everything. He's the kind of guy that would read all the tax laws and interpretation bulletins and mold his life to that. He was one of the first people that was working from home. He had his printer in a different room than where he had his office, so that he could claim more square footage as the home office. He was that kind of guy. And he wasn't an accountant or anything. He was an IT guy. He just read lots. One day the three of us went down to the beach to smoke cigars. In parks you're not allowed to smoke, but we grabbed our chairs and went anyways. The tide was low, so we went down just past the rocks where the sand started and smoked away. That's where I heard this story. So remember, Einstein told a story about if he had 1 hour to solve a problem to save his life, he would think of the proper question for 58 minutes. Well, Jim's one of those kind of guys that ask questions that we don't think about. He looked around the park because he was busted one time, and he asked himself this question. I can see the property line where the road is, I can see the property line where there's a house next door, and he can see the property line where there was a hotel next. But where is the property line when you're looking out at the ocean? He did his homework and he found out that while the city owned the foreshore, it was DFO that owns the ocean from the high tide line down. That is Crown land, and they don't have a prohibition for smoking on the ocean. That is where we had our chairs the day he told me the story. So he lives in a retirement city with lots of old ladies who have their morning walks the same time he has his morning cigar. That's how he got busted in the first place, but he was ready after he did his research. He used that printer that was in the other room, and he printed out the laws. He also made a phone call to one of his cigar buddies who was a lawyer who knew a lawyer that did property stuff. I'm not talking about real estate transactions when you buy a house, I'm talking about property rights, air rights, things like that. A lot higher up in the food chain. Top floor corner office kind of guy. So depending on cigar you're looking at 45 minutes to smoke a Robusto to an hour and a half for a Churchill or anything bigger than that. Soon thereafter the Karens came by complaining about him smoking in the park even though he was in the ocean. This was even years before anyone was called Karen. So the Karens started bugging him and threatened to call police or bylaw, and he told them to go ahead. He just started his cigar, so he had plenty of time. He sent a message to his lawyer friend of a friend to give him a heads up he might be calling later. No problem. Well, the Karens didn't just call bylaw, they called the police. So Jim continued smoking his cigar, while he handed over the printout regarding foreshore ownership. It's not fault of the police because they're used to speeding and stuff like that, but they didn't know this law. Bylaw comes by and pretty much the same, so he gets on his phone, shows them the lawyer's website, and makes the call. Meanwhile, the cops and bylaw are phoning their supervisors about this as well. Of course the Karens are not happy, so they start complaining about the second-hand smoke, but they don't have any legal basis. Jim talks to the property rights lawyer on speakerphone, and he says for the police and bylaw supervisors to give him a shout, and he will enlighten them about where park property begin and end. And of course the best part of the story is that we were smoking a 10-year-old Punch Churchill when he told me the story. So the epilogue is that whenever he's smoking at low tide and bylaw comes by, not just for him, but for dogs and drinking and other stuff like that, they always shake their head and wave. They told him they've had complaints about him smoking in the park, and they now ask where is the guy? In the park or down on the sand? Because the sand isn't park. It's the ocean. Technicians have to account for non-repair activity, all right then. Back in the previous century, I was part of a field service department for a computer company. We had service engineers all over the country, most of them working from home. When they weren't working directly on customer service calls, they did tasks like low-level repairs on spare parts, shipping bad parts to our logistics center, catching up on paperwork, all the routine stuff. We basically just used our billing as a measure of whether we could support a remote tech in any one area. We didn't worry too much about how many hours each tech was working since it varied by area and changed from month to month anyway. I was assigned from my regular job to help implement a tracking system so we could gather metrics like travel time, TTR, parts used. System had an inventory module with an eye to making this into a billing system later on. We were doing all billing by hand actually on Lotus 123 spreadsheets. Then we had a change of senior management who decided our remote techs weren't working enough. We needed to have them working at least some number of hours per week at a minimum. We explained that not all their work was tracked, only actual time at a customer's site and travel, none of the admin tasks were recorded. They didn't care, we needed to prove we needed each tech, how much money we billed didn't matter. This is where the MC comes in. I was the project manager between the service department and the programmers that maintained and improved the tracking system. My company had bought the source code from the vendor. The various service managers came to me, worried that they would be forced to lay off some of the techs if we couldn't figure out a way to capture the extra tasks these folks were doing. So, we figured out some broad categories of things the techs did, and I created change requests that I sent to programming staff to implement. These were easy for them to implement, and we then explained to all the field techs that it was in their interest to report as much stuff as possible. You mailed a package to head office? Create a ticket and close it with the time recorded. Another tech needed some phone support? Same thing, create a ticket. You needed to fill out your expense report and/or timesheet? No problem, just create a ticket. Needless to say, all our remote techs magically became busier, and the bean counters were satisfied. And of course our billings did not change one iota. It was a total waste of time and more work for our dispatchers, who had to open and close these additional service calls. But sometimes you just have to do silly things to keep the bosses happy. It's a comedy show. Just watch it and laugh. You got it. Context. South Korean TV network KBS used to have a show called Gag Concert. It started in 1999, and the idea was to have a series of skits presented by the best comedians of the time. During its glory years, many comedians rose to fame with their amazing skits. The show was broadcasted every Sunday evening, and was meant as a time for families to come together and laugh. And I used to laugh at it, then come into school the Monday morning and talk to my friends about it. This show managed to last until 2020, and as you can imagine, it began to lose its steam and popularity after all those years. The last episode was aired on June 26, 2020, and although there are many different opinions on what led to its downfall, the three main reasons everyone seems to agree on is because heavy reliance on guest stars including athletes, K-pop stars, actors, and even some politicians. Used to be moderate but soon became an overused staple, like, they would make the guest stars say the funny line instead of doing it themselves. The skits that started out really strong began to run out of ideas, and recycled the same material over and over again, or completely changed their narrative structure, which ended up worse than the original. Instead of creating memes/catchphrases like it used to, it began to follow memes/catchphrases from other popular media. I definitely felt this sometime around 2012-13 and began to lose interest. Not my mom. She insisted that we all sit down to watch Gag Concert instead of letting us kids do what we wanted to do. She said it was important for a TV network to have a comedy show because they are bringing humor to this world. Because I love spending time with family, I rolled with it. This lasted until one day in 2019, when I was completely done with the show. I firmly told my mom I hate watching that show, the joke is so forced, and they clearly have stopped trying. Her response, it's a comedy show. Just watch it and laugh. MC. so I began to watch it. As soon as the first round of audience laughter was heard, I let out the most fakest laugh I could muster. Think of reading comic book Joker's ha 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 lines without any vocal tones. I also loudly declared, "OMG, that's so funny. I'm dying here." There were also some really badly written jokes that no one in my family laughed at, but I did. Again, with the fakest laugh I can muster. The whole show was around 60 minutes, but after 20 minutes my mom paused it and tried to scold me for ruining the experience. Me, what? You said it was a comedy show and I should watch and laugh at it? Mom, fine, you don't have to laugh at everything. But can we at least try to go through the whole thing? Me, okay. We didn't end up watching the whole 60 minutes. Around 30 minutes in, we all agreed it was not that great, and decided to watch another K-drama. Afterwards, my mom admitted how boring the show was, and never brought it up again. My mom for the most part is a great person to talk to, and I love the old lady to death, but she can be very insistent on things, and this was one of many times where she didn't get what she wanted and realized how wrong she was. Thanks for watching.